We have a fantastic lineup of presenters, all of whom could speak for hours on this topic, but we've been very cruel and will keep them to 8 minutes or so. And indeed, I will ring a little bell after 7 minutes to keep us to time. I would urge them and you do please put in the chat either comments or questions, but also links to work which you think is relevant. Since setting this session up, I've heard of quite a few different projects working in a similar space, trying to use particularly generative AI for evidence synthesis, and it's a field moving very, very fast. And the more we can share good examples, links, the better. So, as I say, there will be a little bit of time at the end for comments or questions or proposals. We're going to start with my colleague who's in the room with me, Basil Mahfouz, who's a colleague in UCL STEaPP and who has been developing new ways of looking at the links between research, supply, and demand using data. So, Basil.
All right, so we're focusing today on identifying the mismatch between research demand and research supply. So this has only been made available because of an upsurge of data, bibliometric data. On one hand, we have Overton, which is indexed over 8 million policy documents. On the other hand, we have Elsevier's International Center for Aesthetic Research, which has made available all the metadata on scholar research. So we're looking at the middle of these two, at the intersection of these two databases to try to understand the dynamics of research demand and supply in public policy. Just to recap, we've extracted about 40 IPCC reports and then tracked about 35,000 scholarly papers that they cite. So this is our demand corpus, right? The papers that were cited in the IPCC. We then matched all these papers to their selected topics. And one of Elsevier's categorizations mechanisms is 97,000 individual topics, which are grouped into 1,500 topic clusters. So using these topics, we're able to couple every paper that was cited with all the other papers in the same date range that were published under the same topic. So that's now how we have demand and supply to be able to analyze for each of these papers cited. While we've done a lot of different analysis, I'm going to talk to you today about only 3 of them. So the first one is about identifying the hot topics. So which topics are more in demand than others, at least for the IPCC. So here you can see we've done a relative rank analysis, which shows the topics in blue that are in overly demanded, so more relatively cited, and in red, the ones that are oversupplied. So there's more published than there is cited. And you can see quite a wide variety. One example is of over-demanded research is the wind farms, which we can further use to zoom in, because what we do have is for each topic, we have the abstracts and the keywords that are associated with every individual publication. So we can actually zoom in, think of it like an atom. So once we find the topic, we can zoom in and look at different protons and electrons. So in this case, we can look at the different keywords that are associated with every single publication and see if those words are more relatively cited than not. So in this wind farms topic, we can see that air elasticity is in higher demand by policy than, for example, horizontal axis wind turbines. Right? So this can be done and replicated for every single topic that we use. The second aspect is looking at the quality of papers in research. So are the papers that are cited coming from journals that have higher journal impact factors, or coming from papers that were cited more often? Here are 2 examples. On the left, we see that yes, they tend to papers cited by the IPCC tend to come from authors that have higher H indexes, and on the other side, we see that they also come from journals that have higher cite score. But the more interesting thing is that we can actually group all these data points and run regressions to try to see to what extent every single every single factor, every single variable influences whether or not a paper gets cited in policy or not. For me, the more interesting aspect of this isn't to create kind of a, yes, you're doing good quality, you're citing good quality research or not, but actually use to benchmark organizations or different governments to try to compare how well they're doing at trying to elicit the highest quality research that was available out there. The third aspect is looking at geographic analysis, right? Trying to understand which countries are overrepresented or underrepresented in the research. So here, for example, what we did is looked at the number of topics where countries are either overachieving or underachieving. So by overachieving, we mean that they don't publish a lot, or when they publish, they get cited a lot. And underachieving is that they publish a lot, but not most of it does not get cited. So some examples, you can see China tends to underachieve in a lot of topics. On the other hand, we see the United States and the UK tend to overachieve in a lot of topics, but also underachieve in a lot as well. So there's a lot of room for certain areas to go. But given this framework, we can actually zoom in and identify which topic, by which research, by which country, and which topic is either overachieving or underachieving. So here we see, in the United States, we have, for example, rural areas and land use modeling tends to be, the United States tend to overachieve in that area. And the UK, for example, tends to overachieve in research on butterflies and moths. But on the flip side, we have, for example, China underachieving in a topic dealing with landslides and slope stability. Now, the interesting thing here is that for a single topic, if you can see the first and the last topic is land use and land use, we can actually see which country has a large an overrepresentation in the market share and which country doesn't. We can actually kind of normalize to see which country should be kind of taking over from others. But what I personally like about this research is actually you can identify hidden sparks of innovation. So countries that tend to really excel in certain topics that you wouldn't have thought of. For example, Turkey with hydrogenation research, or Egypt with groundwater resources. I've kept this as quick as possible to give time, but if you'd like to learn more about all the topics, there's a blog post on the IPPO website. I'll share the link in the chat later on, where we describe all these in a lot more detail. With that, thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to you, Professor.
So our next speaker is Tom Wilkinson. I actually asked our speakers to challenge each other, and he's already started doing this with a challenge to Basil on the power law citations issue, which maybe you might answer in the chat. Tom is Chief Data Officer in the Scottish Government and also very much an innovator in his own right. So Tom, over to you.
Thanks very much, Geoff, for that introduction. I'm sorry, Basil, if those seem like challenges rather than stimulating points of debate. So although I'm currently Scotland's Chief Data Officer, what I'm going to show you today harks back to my work in the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office as the Head of Data Science there, and preceding that in the Department for International Development, leading on data for them. And it is, on the surface, a tool for collecting information. So although it might not have AI directly behind it, it hopefully generates data that could fill in gaps that AI may not get from the messy data that does exist. So what were we doing here? Well, we were dealing with what loosely might be called results, or what is being achieved in international development programs, with a lot of different people asking for different things in the space. But essentially what we found ourselves needing to do was to take what was quite a linear way of thinking about what was being done and what was being achieved, and a very disparate set of ways of doing that. You could imagine a sort of confusion of tongues, really, when it comes to how people were describing what was being achieved by aid programs, and to try and give people a common language through which to talk about the theories of change, so the complicated causal networks that justified those aid interventions that they were involved with. And although in a completely separate lineage from large language models and generative AI, there are some ongoing advancements in causal machine learning, particularly probabilistic graphical models that can give some of this same kind of picture of what causes what. It's still something that AI can't necessarily do for us. And particularly when we've not described our causal justification for what we're doing, in a way that has the detailed, robust structure that that you'd get from a theory of change, a sort of a picture showing what causes what. So we mapped out the way in which people who are designing an agent intervention interact with their data. Generally, they develop a theory of change with a partner who will try and deliver that theory of change, and that might be a healthcare intervention, or it might be an education intervention, or a governance intervention. And through that, they'll then develop a set of KPIs, indicators they're going to try and achieve. And what we did was to try and find a way to bring all that data together, along with data on evidence, and let it be served up in a combined form across lots of different interventions. And we did that across a number of portfolios: the UK's International Climate Finance portfolio, governance portfolio, Syria, and research. And what I will demo for you very quickly is the web application we built off the back of all of this, which I will emphasize is not the be all and end all of the work. That the work itself was generating that common language, which could be the underpinnings of any tool or set of tools, but would allow those tools to talk to each other so that the data from them could be brought together to show, I guess, the common causal thinking across a whole collection of different disparate activities. So when I'm in this tool, I can look at a particular portfolio of activities. For example, this demo portfolio, and within that, I might look at a particular intervention where I'm tracking progress on a healthcare intervention, let's say against the administrators that we've trained, or the improvements in infectious diseases, based perhaps on some qualitative reporting or on quantitative reporting. Now, crucially, I can connect all of these different things that we're doing and that we're trying to achieve together into a causal network, where I'm saying that, for example, improved treatment of infectious and other diseases will lead to government public support for healthcare and budget, or improved prevention of infectious diseases. And that in turn will lead to improved access to health services. And I can add in extra causal relationships as I think they exist. And I can also, for particular causal relationships, I can highlight the evidence that supports them. And it's not the most exciting necessarily of things to be able to just plug all this together without sort of using AI to enhance the information we already have. But as a data professional, often it's what we don't have explicitly said in the data, and it's just tacit knowledge held by the people involved, which is the real limitation, not our ability to process the data we already have. There's lower hanging fruit that need to be addressed first. Now, having looked at that at the project level, at the activity level, I can then start to look at things at a higher level, at the level of a whole portfolio. So this might be the health portfolio for the whole of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. It might be the combined portfolio over health and education and governance for a particular country. But the way in which the common language works behind the scenes here allows us to look at both those lenses, have those different ways of grouping together the activities, and within those activities, different ways of grouping up the different results being targeted, so that multiple different theories of change, those causal networks at the project level, can be summarized neatly in different ways at those portfolio levels, regardless of what that portfolio is, what grouping of activity that represents. And the idea there is to allow for the hierarchical nature of organizations and supply chains, in which a strategy at the highest level is not necessarily what all of the projects are working to. They may well be working to sub-strategies which target that high-level strategy but express things in different terms. The idea is to start to provide a language through which the frontline activities, which are responding to a strategy that may look quite disconnected from the overarching organizational strategy in the language that it's using, behind the scenes, there's hard data connecting those things together so that causal links can be drawn, evidence can be compared across different activities, and where KPIs have been input, those can easily be aggregated up to give a picture of progress against the agendas for even the highest level portfolios. For example, the International Climate Finance portfolio. That's all I've got in terms of demo. Looks like I've squeezed through on time. I'll share some links in the side now, including contacts at the FCDO who are still involved in development, they're still directly involved in development.
Thank you very much, Tom. I mean, one of the many reasons I was really impressed when I first saw this is as a way of really embedding evidence into everyday action, policy design, implementation, performance management. And my hope would be that something like what Tom has just showed could just become normal practice in a few years' time. So these things, which at the moment are often rather disparate, your data collection, your performance management, budget setting, design, and the use of evidence are all integrated and made just semi-automatic. So comments, suggestions, and other equivalents any of you have seen, please put those in the chat. And I hope, as I say, this can be pursued in practice. Our next speaker is James Thomas, who's a colleague of mine who's run the Epicenter, which is one of IPPO's main partners in doing fully fledged evidence synthesis. So James, I hope you are ready to share your thoughts on both what generative AI can do, but also what it can't do and how we avoid maybe some of its limitations.
So yeah, as Geoff said, slightly more politely than some people might say, I'm kind of an evidence synthesis nerd or systematic review nerd. So a lot of what I do is around evidence synthesis and systematic reviews to inform policy. So my starting point is really that, first of all, decisions that affect people's lives should be informed by reliable research when possible. Also, that individual research studies can be atypical, and what we need to do is draw on the sum of current knowledge, which, as we all know, is easier said than done. But as a starting point, I thought I would put that out there. And of course, that's where evidence synthesis comes in, and that's the focus of this session. So if they're the way to go, that's fine, but evidence syntheses themselves can be unreliable. And there's two main reasons for that. One is that they've just been done badly. There are various ways in which we can do them badly, and also that the research that they contain itself is not reliable. So when we're thinking about digital tools for evidence synthesis, we need to be thinking, okay, so do they support me to not do evidence synthesis badly? And do they support me to make sure that I'm paying due respect to the need for research to be reliable? So critical questions that I ask when using an evidence synthesis tool. Does it allow me to draw on the sum of current knowledge, or does it present me with an incomplete or potentially biased picture? Does it enable me to distinguish between reliable and unreliable research, or does it basically treat everything as equally reliable? The good news is that there is a whole generation of new evidence synthesis tools drawing on large language models and other enablers. So there's increased availability of open access research now. We can get very comprehensive databases, certainly of the bibliographic information, titles and abstracts of research, and more research is being published open access, which makes it easier for some of these new tools to access the knowledge contained in documents. We've got increased computing power, memory and compute, which makes things scale much better. And then we have advances in machine learning technology. So these enablers have enabled a number of new tools to be developed. And I'm going to just talk you through a few of them. And really what I'm trying to do today is to sort of give you some pointers for some interesting new tools that you might want to go and check out. And then also some cautionary tales or notes about what to think about when you're testing one of these new tools. So our old favorite, as it now is almost, ChatGPT, you've all played with it. So I've asked a number of these tools the same question around mindfulness-based interventions. Are they effective for smoking cessation among people who smoke? So ChatGPT says they show some promise, basically. More research is needed to establish long-term effectiveness, but there's evidence to suggest they can be helpful. Okay. So asking it those questions I asked, does it enable me to draw on the sum of current knowledge and distinguish between reliable and unreliable research? No, is the answer to the first one. We all know that's no. ChatGPT is not up to date. Its data set, if you like, is only up to date as far as September 21. So it's out of date, but also we don't actually know how complete its training data were anyway, let alone the other technical details about how well easy it's actually to access that information in a sort of like a systematic way. So no, it's not a good source of the sum of current knowledge. And no, it doesn't enable me to distinguish between reliable and unreliable research. I have no idea where this text came from. It's been generated through its algorithm based on the language model underpinning it. However, I think probably ChatGPT is a very good source for writing things like horoscopes and other creative writing where the stakes are rather lower than making decisions that affect people's lives. So if I were a horoscope writer, I would be slightly worried now about the security of my job. So that was ChatGPT. There's some fantastic technology there, but as a chatbot, it's not ready and it's not suitable for making decisions. The other tools are getting there. So Connected Papers takes this open access data set of scientific knowledge and really enables you to interact with it in quite a visual way. I can't sort of show you the interactions here, but you start with a seed paper and then it shows you both the citation relationships and also the conceptual relationships. It's slightly worryingly as it does seem to sort of overemphasize citation as being a useful metric, but it's a useful source of starting and getting into a subject. I've put no, it doesn't enable me to draw on the sum of current knowledge because I don't know for sure that there's other papers lurking behind the scenes, which actually I would want to look at. But it does enable me to distinguish between unreliable and reliable in that it gives me the papers there and I can make my own decisions about them. Another tool you might want to look at is Cite, which is a level more sophisticated than the Connected Papers that I've shown you there. There it does have a database of scientific papers, and it also works with the language model. So it can tell me about mindfulness interventions, and it can actually directly answer my question like ChatGPT did. So it says that there's limited research, but there's evidence to suggest mindfulness-based interventions can be beneficial, and it gives me some of the papers. Slightly worryingly from my point of view is it only gives me 8 papers to work with. So in terms of the sum of current knowledge, again, it's a little bit iffy, but I've not given it the red X there. But again, it enables me to distinguish between unreliable and reliable research if I read the papers myself. I've given it a red X there because it gives this nice summary, but it doesn't distinguish between different types of research, different reliability of research. It doesn't distinguish between reviews of research with lots of studies in them and individual studies. So there's some work to do there, but it's a really interesting and useful tool if you want to get a quick answer to a question. It certainly supplies it. There's just more work to do in terms of critically appraising what it's giving you. And I think probably the most advanced of these now is Elicit, which many of you may have tried, I don't know. But again, I can put my question around mindfulness interventions, and it will tell me that they're promising but limited, or promising but mixed rather. What you tend to find is it doesn't always give you the most up-to-date. None of these do in terms of most recent research, because they rely on citation metrics to identify what might be more important than something else. And also this one, we've got a paper here reviewing lots of studies, and it's sort of just listed down there alongside sort of individual studies. And there's a potential sort of bias towards studies which give you slightly more positive findings at the beginning it gives you before it gets to the more mixed. So Elicit. Again, its data set may or may not be complete. It's difficult to tell, but I think it's probably on the right lines. And again, like Cite, I can read the papers myself, make my own mind up about them. I would be cautious about relying on its summary there, because I don't know exactly the sort of like the status of the research which the summary is based on. Last of all, I asked the same question, of course, of the Cochrane Library, where individuals have spent several years probably going down and finding all the research and answering this question. There's actually no clear evidence. So there's a potential bias in terms of the automatically generated findings there that potentially, and I see this a few times, that they tend to sort of, they want to be helpful. They want to say, yes, there's something there, whereas potentially there might not be. And actually know that there's not something there is actually a useful finding in itself. So finally, once we've got a review, how do we keep the things up to date? And that's one of the things that we've been working on at the Epicenter at UCL. So again, the enabler is the OpenAlex dataset, big open access dataset of research. And again, we've got machine learning using language models in the middle here. Essentially, what we can do is we can have each review that we want to keep up to date. We subscribe to this model every month. We build a new machine learning model which learns the scope of each review. New papers arrive, around 800,000 new papers arrive every month. Every paper is scored against every review, and relevant new papers then get automatically alerted to us. So when we're maintaining an evidence surveillance on a particular subject, there's an automated system to enable us to do that. So if we're still maintaining our COVID-19 research map, basically because it's all automated, it's not really requiring any of our time anymore. We've got lots and lots of training data in there now. We just click a switch every month, crank the handle, and in comes still many thousands of new research studies. So just to finish off with some technologies behind the tools for you. ChatGPT is really helpful for giving you a quick insight into some of the concepts behind a particular phenomenon that we're interested in. We've just got to bear in mind it's a language model, it's not a database, it's not comprehensive, it's not up to date, it's not suitable on its own as a question answering system. Connected papers is the next sort of tier up, if you like, even though it's below, in that it's a database using open access data, and it's a really nice way of exploring relationships, both citation and conceptual. Could be comprehensive and up to date. We need to check that as we go. It does require more work on our parts to make sense of the papers. And then we've got the other three that I showed you, Cite Elicit, and then the EPI Reviewer for keeping things up to date. There we're starting to see something really quite interesting where we've got a language model. Sometimes they're using the OpenAI models, sometimes they're using open access language models, but we've got large language models being used alongside the database. So they're being used to interpret questions and then to assist with writing those summaries. And there we're starting to get the best of both worlds. Potentially, we've got comprehensive databases at the back, and we've got the beginnings of the ability to quickly summarize research findings. But we do have to still take that with a pinch of salt, because we don't yet have tools within those tools that take account of, for example, the size of the study, where the study has been taking place, its contextual factors, and how reliable the study is. So in summary, do go and check out those tools if you've not, because they are really quick ways of getting into a research problem fast. They're thanks to open access data, more resource in terms of compute and machine learning tech. And just do bear in mind my my cautionary messages there. If the data that something is drawing is not comprehensive, then it's not drawing on the sum of current knowledge. So we really need to be critical about that. We could just be overemphasizing existing biases in the literature. And does it enable us to distinguish between reliable and unreliable research? Okay.
Thank you so much, James. That was a fantastically pithy distillation of a great deal of thought about these tools and some very clear steers. And I'm very glad to say we are using, of course, the EPI tools for some of the reviews we as IPPO are doing at the moment. And it's a perfect segue to our last two presentations, which are very much in this same space. So first of all, Bose Quackle, now at Cisco, and who's just finished a PhD on exactly this topic. So Bose, the floor is yours for a few minutes.
I did a master's degree in this. I unfortunately have not yet completed a PhD. So the project that we did was finished a few weeks ago. Please keep that in mind as we go through this rather high-level presentation. With generative AI, of course, so much comes out that the models that we use could have been hugely improved already. For example, we used Vicuna, as you'll see, and new versions of that have come out. So maybe something that could improve this is already on the market, but the concept still stands. So what I'll be taking you through is the pipeline that we created at Elsevier when I did my internship there, to take research papers and to, with minimal human effort, generate policy papers from them. It was a bit of a moonshot project when we started, but I mean, we turned out something pretty great. Small bit about me. So my name is Boas. I did an MSc in Information Systems and currently am employed by Cisco as a systems engineer. The people that worked with me on this project, huge shout out to Marius and Paul. They were my supervisors during the project. And Raul and Rachel are two people from Elsevier. If you're interested in this topic, please reach out to them. They're hugely helpful and we'll be happy to talk to you. So the problems that we identified before we began was basically there's too much information for policymakers to digest. The knowledge that they have can date quickly, the papers that they use to get that information from, so the synthesis is often late and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of human resources. And beyond that, there's even a disconnect between science and policymakers on what good evidence actually consists of. So a solution that we came up with was to use a conversational large language model such as ChatGPT, that is, I think, the best well-known example, to generate a policy brief based on scientific evidence. So the data that we used, we decided to focus on lithium supply because lithium supply is hugely important for the transport industry in Europe. So we figured it would be interesting, and there's a lot of research that comes out. We took a pre-clustered data set from Elsevier themselves, No Energy, which is available through the website, and we synced that with Science Direct to make sure that we could get full text records. So we did not only use abstracts, but we used 18,000 plus full text records, so a huge amount of data to go off of. Then we had to choose a model. We ended up choosing Vicuna 7B, which is one of the large language models that was out during that time. It outperformed some very interesting models by Facebook or Meta these days. It's open source, and most interestingly for us and mostly for Elsevier was the weights are stored locally, which means that a lot of the data that you put into it, you can control and you can modify, and you have a lot of proprietary data that's very good. So we had a model, we had a lot of data, but connecting that model to that data is often a huge problem, even these days. For example, with ChatGPT, as was said in the previous presentation, it's hard to know what it was based on because a lot of that data isn't available and often you can't connect your own data. So the solution that we came up with is to vectorize all of those 18,000 full text documents and use a Python library called LangChain to connect Vicuna, the database, into one package that we could then enter prompts, so queries, into to generate text. So to generate text with one of these conversational large language models, what you need is a prompt. What you can imagine for that is if you ask anyone in this room a question, the question would be the prompt and the model would reply with an answer. So what I did was I read through 30-ish policy templates from universities all across the world, from policy organizations all across the world. And I did research into prompt engineering to create a set of prompts to make sure that we gave them the best shot at creating the best policy paper. So a prompt would look something like this. I'm not going to go over it. I'll send you the slides after for the time. So this is the rather intense looking pipeline that we created. So you see the database, we do some steps to make embeddings and vectors, and then we all feed that into one thing. And the highest sort of goal for us was to create something that needed minimal human interaction when everything was set up. So a policy maker or a policy user could use this as long as an engineer had created all the other steps without needing further interaction from them, as it were. So this is a result that I created. Once again, I'll not read it all, but you can read it later. So far, honestly, we were quite surprised with the quality of the output and the results. These are some quick prompt engineering results that we had. So active language beats passive language. The length is very significant because these models can get overwhelmed pretty quickly. asking the model to generate a fact list at the end generated better output. I am still not quite sure why, but maybe that is something for future research. Fluid language also improves the results. None of these are really groundbreaking results, but I thought it would be interesting to include them here for those who maybe have not worked with Gen AI as much. So what went well? We did some interviews at the end to make sure that the quality could be guaranteed and that we had a method of validation. So the readability, the structure, the usage potential, and the steps we took to make sure it was a responsible design were all rated very highly by the participants. We did a survey with around 30 participants from policy organizations around the world, and then a few in-depth interviews to validate even more. So what did not go well? As you would read through the slide with the policy paper on it, the scientific level was way lower than we expected for the amount of scientific information that we gave to the model. It, as the quote says, really blows up its information. And in addition, we did some sourcing that I could go into a bit more later, but I am conscious of the time. And there should be more done to guarantee the sources and that we could properly give credit to the authors of the 18,000 documents that we ended up using for this. A pet project of mine was personalized briefs. This was a big point of contention between the people that we interviewed, whether or not it would be good to create the model in such a way that we could personalize it to the policymaker that was reading it. On the one hand, it could really improve their knowledge. On the other hand, with the bubbles that we already in the society, there's problems there. But on the other hand, one of the interviewees said, there is always a bias. So the model having a bias isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as we are aware of it. And I think I would agree. So to conclude, it was a successful proof of concept, but there's still a lot to be gained in this area. I think when I started, we already decided it was going to be a shot for the moon. And I think we successfully shot for the moon. Now someone else has to land it. But to that, we will pass it on. So thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I will share these slides and my thesis. So the end product is available at the link that is on the slide. So feel free to read it if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boaz. And yeah, do follow up the published version of this. I mean, in a way, this is all, it's fascinating that so many of these things we couldn't have even been talking about 12 months ago because ChatGPT was not even launched, was it 12 months ago? So we're in a very rapid process of learning how to make the most of these tools, avoid the hallucinations, and so on. And our last speaker is Adrian Radishel from Elsevier, who are a partner of ours on many things and working in a way, a similar space on using large bodies of scientific research for synthesis. So Adrian, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Radishel. As mentioned, I'm a product manager at Elsevier. And today I'm really much building on the last two presentations in a lot of way. James's comments on generative summaries based on academic material and also what Boaz did as well, to show you our first attempt in this area from a Scopus perspective. So we've just launched our first generative summary tool into the market. And the primary goal we were trying to solve with this tool was to really make it easy and accessible to understand new information. Specifically, the tool is being designed right now to focus on helping people learn about new areas or looking for potentially cross-disciplinary opportunities, not really a comprehensive tool, though we've heard that feedback from a few people recently as well, looking into it. So I guess for policy generation, you've seen examples of this already. The interesting part of this is, can you select a bunch of really valuable information that's relevant to the area you're interested in and synthesize into something that can help you make informed decisions? So I'm going to potentially show a live demo, and actually it's kind of inspired by James's common query here. So I thought I'd pop that in about smoke cessation and mindfulness. I'm doing this in a staging environment, so hopefully this works and the team hasn't put anything out in the last few minutes. And I think what you'll see is a kind of similar thing to what you saw James before. It's what we're doing is we're using the Scopus, the trusted Scopus corpus database, and we've created this vector search on top of it, which tries to find specific papers that directly answer this query. And we're primarily ranking based on how the quality of that content rather than other signals like citations at this point. And similar to what you've seen before is a generated summary stating here, for example, there's some evidence to support this, but, more research is needed. And again, we're trying to make it easy for researchers to, be able to copy something like that and plop it somewhere so that they can, take a look at it later, see where that information comes from. Again, this is really important to ensure that when we're prompting these generative AIs, we're asking it to base its statements on real abstract data from a source that they can go and critique themselves. That transparency is very important. But the other really big thing about this that we've found interesting is the summary is nice and all, but one thing we find is that if you're trying to explore a new topic area, knowing the vocabulary or knowing what the next question you want to ask is pretty challenging. So actually, the most successful thing we've seen so far are these things called go deeper queries. So for example, if I wanted to see the effectiveness compared to other smoking cessation methods, it suggests that as a potential question that might follow up from this. And you can effectively continue your journey down the rabbit hole, continue exploring this topic from different areas. Additionally, we're also exploring other ways to make this content accessible, and something I haven't seen too much in the market so far, but I mean, if I, for example, let's take this away. What are effective policy changes for tackling political corruption? One thing we're also exploring is, can we present these generated summaries, not just as text, but as other things as well? And one of those ways we're looking into is potentially visualizations. And if we give that a second, hopefully what you'll see is taking the main concepts from the main abstracts we've identified, which right now is limited to 10, and we try to illustrate that for you in a different way. So if you kind of wanted a bird's eye view on the topic and see the main terms or concepts around something, you could explore from this way, and maybe even click on these to change or go deeper queries. It's a pretty exciting time to be in this field, and I won't go into too much more detail because it's been covered already so well, but we're using that model you've seen already, which is called Retrieval Augmented Generation, or the horrible acronym RAG, which effectively is a really fancy way of taking a query, finding those appropriate documents we think are associated with that query, and then passing it to a large language model to try and synthesize into something that tries to directly answer that query, and ensure that it's basing its claims and assumptions on documents, and it's clear for users to understand where that information came from. It's kind of a bit like directing a movie is the way we've illustrated it is, if the large language model with the prompt engineering is a script, then your star is your query, and the scenery and the props are the documents we pass. And we think there's a whole bunch of interesting generated outputs we can create with this. But I won't go into too much more detail around this. That's our foray into this, and we're really excited to see how we can work with the community to expand and improve this over time. We're still learning. This is still alpha, so this will change over time. And yeah, really interesting to see where this tech goes the next 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and thanks for real-time improvisation on smoking cessation. We've just got a few minutes left for either perhaps suggestions from anyone who's on the call of other things or examples which you think people should be aware of. Please either put your hand up or put something in the chat if you think there's something missing from, I think, what have been pretty comprehensive presentations. There's been quite a bit of discussion in the chat about handling biases of all kinds, and obviously there's machine bias, human bias, and policy making is definitely not free from all its different manifestations. And I'd like to hear from each of our speakers, perhaps just before we end, maybe just 1 minute each on where you think we might be in, let's say, 12, 24 months, either in terms of the frontiers of the technologies addressing some of these problems, but also their embedding in daily life. How do we make them really frictionless and easy to use for harried, stressed policymakers who don't have time usually to dig deeper or to really question the stuff coming into them? But first of all, is anything anyone would like to say which was missing, you think should have been presented, which is either a tool or an example in this space which should be widely known? And if no one puts their hand up at that, then we've done at least part of our job well, hopefully, in covering the territory. James, I wondered if you wanted to respond to what Adrian was showing on his sort of improvised use of his tool on smoking cessation. Any comments from you on that?
Yeah, no, I liked it. I think he could answer actually a question in the chat, which was around hallucinations and large language models. In that the way that I assume the Scopus tool works is similar to some of the others in that you vectorized essentially your corpus. And so we're not worried about hallucinations in terms of the retrieval of the relevant records that you're getting there. But are you using a language model to help write the summary? And in which case, is it possible that we start getting hallucinations in the summary writing, or is there a different way that you're doing it? I think probably, Adrian, you probably know the answer to this as well.
I can address some of that. So, I mean, in our case, we're using the RAG model, which I mentioned before. Again, find the appropriate documents, pass it to our large language model, which at the moment we're using ChatGPT, give it the prompts, and then give it the query and the prompts. It's like, hey, be really strict about this. You can't write something unless you can back it up with some information from here. I think it's really important that it's not possible right now, to the best of my knowledge, to eliminate hallucination. I think hallucination is going to be with us for a long time. But I do believe that using this model, what I think a lot of these studies are showing, and in our own internal testing we found, is that greatly diminishes the amount of hallucination that becomes possible. What I generally find is the bigger issue right now with generative models is misunderstanding the intent of the user. So we had a query from a user the other week that looked at atmospheric rivers, for example, a topic I know nothing about. And for whatever reason, it just was convinced it was about rivers in the Amazon rainforest and about a completely different topic, when I actually was talking about how these, almost I don't know how to describe it, how evaporation works and water transports over land for the atmosphere. That's the bigger problem we're seeing right now. But hallucination, not going away anytime soon, but this model we're finding, it greatly helps reduce it. And we'll continue to try finding ways to reduce in the future.
Thanks. Can I ask a question to Tom, which really builds a little bit on the prompt engineering question, which is almost flipping on its head, which is the engineering of prompts. So one scenario, not far into the future, sees every policymaker as essentially facing prompts from their AI, their tools, saying, have you thought of this evidence? Have you thought of, whether this fits your context? Have you thought about how this links to your actual data or anomalies, etc.? Have any of you worked on really good tools, which is where the machine coaching the human to make better decisions, as well as obviously learning how to do the right prompts for the machine intelligence? Tom, have you got a thought on that?
I'd like to say that I'd done more there than building tools for search using the kind of technologies that underpin Google for searching internal corpuses of data within government organizations. In terms of, I guess, proactively prompting someone who was working on a piece of policy, I think there are offers coming to market pretty soon that will integrate closely into, or already out there, that integrate into people's tools that they use for writing documents that would be making sort of prompts like that. And I think the technology involved, would probably be safe of some of the issues that we've just been discussing today. Would be a bit more tried and tested. But sorry, I'm rambling around the point. The short answer is I've not built anything directly like that, but I think it's a pretty realistic expectation that those would be available, and it's a question of building in the quality assurance around, and more than anything, making sure that staff have the skills to use those prompts appropriately and to think beyond their limitations.
Yeah, and in all of this, and I know there's been a lot of your other work, is about the human-machine combination, the collective intelligence, and the AI working in tandem, and that may cover everything from budgets to people issues and so on. We've got 4 minutes left, so perhaps I could ask each of you just for 45 seconds, any final thoughts, perhaps starting with you, Basil, on where this whole field might be heading, or any other final comments for the audience. Basil.
Thank you, Professor. So from my side, I think what I see on the horizon is using, for example, what the generative AI tools to actually, or language models to actually help policymakers identify the right set of evidence. So it's not just about asking the question, but also about saying, hey, I'm cited these papers, or I'm interested in this research. Can you find me relevant research that is very similar to it? And in a lot of cases, the current recommender systems exist, but they use kind of either co-citation or text analysis, but more refined semantic searches would probably be the next thing on the horizon, in my view.
Fantastic. Tom, final thoughts from you.
I think we're going to continue to see exciting progress. I'd really like to see a bridging of the gap between, even once you've given a policymaker relevant research, how do you make sure that the conclusions they draw from that, the way they combine whatever specific conclusions those different pieces of research have, how they combine that into something which systematically tries to solve a policy issue. I think that gap needs filling as well, and you know, that's where the other tools we've seen today alongside Rex that I was demoing could potentially be coming together into a more comprehensive solution, which is suggesting evidence and helping people build a causal model of what they think they can change in the world based on that evidence.
Yeah, thanks. James.
Yeah, I've got one sort of, in the spirit of sort of friendly challenge to other members of the panel as well, sort of slight concern that I see that we're going to end up with, like the Scopus, a beautiful tool on a subset of the knowledge base. And then Wiley will produce a beautiful tool on a subset of the knowledge base, and we'll have all the publishers creating these beautiful tools, none of which are actually giving us the totality of research evidence. And so my concern is the siloing of knowledge in this way is not necessarily of benefits to, well, anybody who actually wants to use the research, what always got it to say.
Yeah, and as a general rule, knowledge thrives best when it's not siloed, it's shared and open. Boaz.
Yeah, I think the two things that I noticed most when I was concluding my research is, when I saw a comment in the chat as well, is the trust in these models can be very high, but I think it's important to realize that no matter how well you code something, or for example, to reduce hallucinations, we even tried fully training a model from the ground up, only giving it the research papers that we had. So there was no way to give information outside of that research. Even then, it will be important that that knowledge is checked and verified by a team of experts. So I think what we should strive for is not full automation or the removal of human expertise. I think what we should truly strive for is how to automate the people that have that knowledge and enable them to do the best job that they can do.
Thanks. Yeah, so humans in the loop still a little bit. Adrian.
Yeah, I kind of want to build on Boaz's point. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future. Seems the rate of change is rapid. But I do hope for a future where these tools are being inserted into our lives in a way that gives us more opportunities and ways to grow as people, both in our careers and also in our own personal development. I think we'll see more of these tools being plugged into more sources and more databases, also getting more context of what's important to you and what your goals are, and hopefully helping you find a constructive way of achieving those goals or showing opportunities that you may have not realized were there. That's why I'd love to see these tools go in the future.
Well, thank you all. And I think even the last hour, we got a glimpse of, a future where actually decision-making is hugely supported by new tools of all kinds, even if you still need human judgment to come in at multiple places. But the landscape will be very different from 5, 10, 20 years ago. And largely, I think, for the better mobilizing huge bodies of knowledge and research and feeding them in to action. We'll be writing up this session with lots of links and so on. If you didn't capture things, I think we'll be sharing all the slides, I hope, and definitely following up on this space. And do come to some of the next sessions in this series on evidence methods. Thank you all very much for joining us on a beautiful sunny day, at least here in the UK. Thank you. And thanks to our speakers.